Within a few miles of the American coast, the Olympic, sailing in a dense fog on a course set by the directional radio of the Nantucket, rammed the lightship, which sunk in 30 seconds. 4 of her crew went down with her, and of the 7 picked up, 3 died shortly after being taken on board. The Olympic was undamaged, and flying her ensign at half-mast, she reached New York the following morning.
Right now, Roy. It all happened so quick that we don't know just how it did happen. We were in the water before we knew it. We most all had our life preservers. Just that was a means of saving our life.
I'm very sorry it happened, but we did our best. Our boats were away in very quick time, and everything was done that we could do for them.
I'd like to confirm that what the captain says.
On the forward part of Sea Deck, Olympic was built with 16 portholes. The Titanic with 14. Somewhat mysteriously, the Titanic has acquired 2 extra portholes between its launch and its maiden voyage. This clearly points to the possibility that the 2 ships were switched. At the time of Titanic's launch, the windows on B deck are clearly discernible as being evenly spaced. Yet at the time of her maiden voyage, they have taken on a distinctly uneven appearance. And whereas the Olympic had been opened to the public for inspection in Belfast and Liverpool, Titanic was not. Harland and Wolff built ships almost exclusively for the White Star Line, which was acquired in 1903 by American financier J. Pierpont Morgan's International Mercantile Marine. This was part of a drive to create a monopoly on the lucrative North Atlantic passenger trade. Chairman of the White Star Line was J. Bruce Ismay. It was in fact Lord Pirrie who was responsible for bringing together Morgan's money and British engineering. It was a serious collision, which was to seal the fate of the Olympic. Pulled in by the suction from the Olympic's great propellers, the Hawk is irresistibly drawn towards the larger vessel, and the 2 ships collide. The Hawk's underwater ram and bows strike and penetrate the starboard side of the Olympic, causing a triangular hole several meters high, and an even larger hole below the waterline. The damage done to the Olympic was severe.
The starboard propeller is going to have to be replaced, and the crankshaft is damaged. There's a crack between the arm and the shaft. But worse, the keel is bent. That's going to give her a permanent list to port, and there's no way we can correct that. We're going to have to cut the ship in half, insert a new frame, and then put it all back together again. The job is going to take months, and frankly, for what it's going to cost, I think it's simply a waste of time.
Can you not just patch her up until Titanic is ready?
By the 2nd of March, she was once again in the Thompson dry dock in Belfast, having her propeller blade replaced. This should have taken only a few hours, but the Olympic was there, in Belfast, until the 7th of March. In Belfast, the Titanic and the Olympic were most often berthed side by side, and were regularly moved in and out of the Thompson dry dock, especially during repairs to the Olympic, side by side on the River Lagan. And that was when the decision to switch them could have been made.
You can't be serious.
Olympic and Titanic are exactly the same.
No one will know we've switched them when they get back to work on Monday morning.
We'll just swap the names. Everything else is standard White Star issue.
I have some boys at the yard who'll do the job for a couple of £100 each and say nothing.
White Star often used photographs, both exterior and interior, of the Olympic as the Titanic, in their advertisements and press releases. Both ships had tiled and linoleum flooring. Yet, just days before Titanic's maiden voyage, Ismay, chairman of the White Star Line, ordered her floors to be carpeted. Was this to cover Olympic's worn linoleum floors? The Harland and Wolff Yard was a vast labyrinth of buildings and workshops, as well as machinery and ships in various stages of completion. Any unusual activity would hardly be noticed. The social order of the day was such that the majority of the workers would never have thought to question their betters. They lived in a time when the majority of the population were told what to think, where to go, what to do and when to do it. At the time of Titanic's maiden voyage, Britain was in the grip of a coal strike. Fuel was in short supply, and ships and men were laid up in Southampton. And yet, White Star Line had difficulty finding firemen and greasers to work below decks on the Titanic. Captain Smith had delayed turning the corner on the outward southern track. He ordered the turn to the west 10 miles further south than the normal turning point. This was certainly not as an evasive measure to avoid the ice field, but one designed to take him directly into it. He must have known this. Ostensibly bound for Boston. Then, on the evening of the 14th of April, the ship came to a dead stop in the middle of the ice field. He also ordered her boilers to be kept fired up and her engines on standby. Why, then, was the Californian stopped? Had she reached her destination, and was she now waiting? Sometime before 11 p.m., lookouts Fred Fleet and Reginald Lee came on watch and climbed to the crow's nest. Captain Smith retired for the night, but coincidentally, like Stanley Lord, he also chose to rest fully clothed, not in his own cabin, but in the chart room behind the bridge, almost as if he expected to be called back to the bridge at any moment. Now there is one thing that sailors fear above all else, and that is fire at sea. And yet when Titanic cast off from Southampton, there was a fire smouldering in number 10 coal bunker. Instead of putting out the fire, the bunker was actually topped up with 400 tons of coal. Captain Smith knew it, the ship's officers and chief engineer knew it, as did those who worked half-heartedly to put it out. Given that the turning circle of the Titanic was 1,280 yards and the stopping distance 850 yards, Titanic should have been able to avoid the iceberg with the greatest of ease, even allowing for a slight delay while orders were given and the wheel turned the ship to port. So why didn't it? Second Officer Lightoller told the inquiry that before going off duty for the night, he would have been easily able to see an iceberg from 1.5 miles, more probably 2 miles away. He also said that the iceberg would have been just as visible from the bridge as from the crow's nest. Plenty of time to turn and avoid it then. In an emergency such as this, it was never a good idea to turn your broadside to danger. Even if Titanic had rammed the iceberg head-on, it would have stayed afloat. Although up to 250 crewmen would have been killed while they slept in their bunks in the bow. Captain Stanley Lord waited for coloured rockets. It is clear from the records that Titanic's navigator worked out a position that was 12 miles away from where they actually were. This was to prove a fatal mistake. We know he was 12 miles out in his calculations because of the actual location of the wreck. The position that Boxall gave would have put the Titanic within sight of the Californian. Was that where he thought he should have been? For some reason, Captain Smith ordered the Titanic to move half speed ahead for another 5 minutes before stopping the engines again for the last time. Maybe he was heading towards the ship whose lights could just be made out on the horizon, expecting it to be the Californian. Several survivors mentioned the sighting of a ship about 5 or 6 miles from the Titanic. The Titanic could easily have steamed there, yet Smith was content to assume the ship would sail over to him, because he believed it was the Californian. But for the captain and the officers, who were in full possession of the facts, there is really no excuse. They dithered because they expected to be rescued. It was 35 minutes before the first distress signal was sent. 35 minutes before the first radio emergency, CQD, was sent. 45 minutes before starting the pumps. 45 minutes before starting to prepare the lifeboats, and a full hour and 25 minutes before the first one was launched. It seems most likely that the ship seen from the Californian was a wooden sailing bark called the Samson, conducting illegal seal fishing activities on the ice floes at the time. The white rockets she was firing, to mast height only, were intended to recall her small rowing boats. A few months after the disaster, the captain of the Samson said that he had also seen a large liner firing rockets and that he had not gone to investigate because of his own illegal activities. The Californian's apprentice, Gibson, later testified that he saw only 8 rockets fired from the ship and all white. The Titanic had fired at least 18, possibly as many as 22, and had included red and blue.